Good evening. My name is Magda Teter. I'm the Schwidler Chair in Judaic Studies at Fordham University and co-director of Fordham Center for Jewish Studies. I am delighted to welcome you to our third evening of the four-part series, Retrospective of Films by Menachem Daum. We began last week with A Life Apart. Oops, sorry, I guess I don't have Life Apart, Hasidim in America, a 1997 film introducing Americans to the Hasidic community. Last week we watched Hiding and Seeking, a remarkable documentary about the Daum family's trip to Poland in search of places from which the family came. All of Menachem Daum's films, in all of them, Holocaust, its memory, and its legacy are a through line. Menachem was a child of Holocaust survivors whose parents met in the displaced persons camp after the war, after they each had lost numerous members of their families, including their spouses and children. Menachem grappled with the moral and existential questions that became for him a part of the Holocaust legacy, and people admittedly took different lessons from the Holocaust, sometimes contradictory, even irreconcilable. This film series is part of our theme this year on disagreement, which we created in response to today's sharp polarization and distressingly intense animosities, exploring both the place of disagreement in Jewish history and how to handle disagreement when confronting complex issues without succumbing to hatred and animosity. Disagreement can be both generative but also very destructive, as we witness in our daily life today. Menachem Daum's films do offer some advice. They are often candid, introspective, honest, even about the missteps as one seeks to bridge contrasting, as I said, often irreconcilable views, clashing narrative, disconnected histories. Hiding and Seeking broached into the subject of Polish-Jewish relations, Jewish destruction and survival in Poland, and in the Jewish context, probably the second most controversial and politically loaded topic, surpassed, I would argue, only by the Jewish and Arab and Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which the Ruins of Lifta tried to tackle. While watching the film, I thought about Paul Berman's book, Blacks and Jews, Alliances and Arguments, a collection of essays by Black and Jewish intellectuals and writers discussing Black and Jewish relations from different political perspectives and historical moments. In his preface, Paul Berman wrote, "Read on, somewhere in the book, you may find one writer or another making your very own point, and one writer or another will make you wince." That's what the Israeli-Palestinian conflict certainly does. Menachem Daum's films explore sensitive, as we see, and controversial questions, but always with empathy and always with a hope to make the world a better place. But as much as the films are about Menachem Daum's brainchild, they are also fruits of collaboration between him and Oren Rudavsky. And I have to say, since Oren's birthday is tomorrow, I want to make this event also a celebration of his work. Happy birthday, Oren, at 120 ve'od. After the film, we will have the opportunity to discuss it with Oren, the film's co-producer Aaron Levitt, and historians Mehnaz Afridi, and Hillel Cohen, and legal scholar Aleksandra Gliszczyńska-Grabias. Before we watch the film, I want to express my gratitude to all of you here joining us in person and online, and to so many of you for your generosity that makes programs like tonight's possible. I also want to invite you to our last screening in this retrospective. So this is today. Next week on Tuesday, February 17th, we'll finish with an unfinished film, Memory Keepers. So come in person or join us simultaneously online, because there's no option to view the film. It's unfinished and it's not available anywhere. So now let's watch the film, The Ruins of Lifta. Thank you. I have questions for all of you in different areas. So I first want to start with sort of talking about the making of the film, access and the dynamic. Then what the film gets at to history, memory, nostalgia, and also law and reconciliation, that are all the themes that come through this film. So first, Oren, I want to start. Oh, and while we're doing it, there are index cards going around. If you want to put questions or comments, we will get to some of them. And I want to invite you to join us tomorrow at 11 a.m. for a breakfast conversation with Hillel to maybe get deeper into some of these issues. So Oren, Menachem once said that this film was a logical, direct follow-up to Hiding and Seeking. I wonder whether you could tell us a little bit more how it came about. How does this film, in fact, fit into Menachem's vision more broadly of building bridges between people and his filmmaking?
I just first want to thank you, Magda, for putting this series together and for honoring Menachem's life. Menachem passed away 2 years ago, and with his unfinished film, and it's just a real, we've been hoping to put together his work in honor and memory of him. So thank you for really making that happen. And I think the chair trick was really brilliant, actually, metaphor for the hell that Palestinians and Jews face in Israel, where there are certainly not enough chairs for people to sit in. And I think, you know, Aaron really, you'll ask him, but he's really responsible for introducing Menachem to Lifta quite, I don't know if it was accidental or not, but I'll let him answer for that. And I just want to say I became a part of this film in a way similar to how next week's film on Polish Memory Keepers, and we're sort of stealing your title, actually, Hidden Sparks, perhaps, as an alternate title for that. So thank you for that. Theft is, as Picasso would say, well, whatever what Picasso would say about it. He did it. Anyway, so I came onto the project later. I was working on a documentary called Colliding Dreams about Zionist history and Palestinian dreams. So I came on somewhere along the way, and certainly, yes, Menachem had to ask himself after we made the film in Poland, Hiding and Seeking, the logical place to go with that was, well, if I'm asking about Polish-Jewish relations, I mean, one thing Menachem did was try to ask himself difficult questions, which are rarely asked in his Orthodox Jewish community, or might I add, up till recently in conservative or reform or secular Jewish communities.
It might be the Jesuit legacy.
Yes,
these questions.
His Jesuit legacy, yes. Well, they clearly did have some impact on him. So he had to ask, well, what about Jews and Palestinians? It's, you know, if I'm going to be consistent, unlike many people in many communities who are not, very few of us are consistent, but he tried to be consistent, and as his moniker on the internet was full of contradictions, or Zaidi at risk, he he asked questions that were difficult. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but it was a logical question to ask, but I think it was accidental in some ways that he found Lifta, or maybe it wasn't accidental. I'm not sure.
Aaron, so how did you come to know Menachem, and how did you introduce him to Lifta? What's your role in this film?
Yeah, no problem. So I met Menachem when he was, apparently, I didn't realize he was working on a film about it, but in the protest pen at the Israel Day Parade, which is kind of like a small freak show at the circus. And
here in New York.
Here in New York, yes, at the Israel Day Parade here in New York. And so there's the Israel Day Parade. There's a small section that's walled off for protesters and manned by NYPD. And it's kind of funny because the protesters, I think, get very upset at the police and miss that actually the police are there to protect us. It's not like they're worried about us doing anything to like the 20,000 marchers. But anyway. So Menachem was at the pen probably a couple of years in a row, just speaking to people who were in the pen, and we were talking about the work I was doing with the International Solidarity Movement and other people like that, and Zochrot, B'Tselem, some other people in the West Bank. And he asked me to kind of just show him around the West Bank. And so in 2009, I made another trip, and he was going to join me, but I wasn't permitted to enter the West Bank because I was supporting Palestinian rights. So we made a backup plan, and I was like, I can't get into the West Bank, but there's this amazing depopulated village on the edge of Jerusalem that I've been trying to do something about. Nothing artistic, that's not my thing, but just some documentary materials. And so, how about if I show you Lifta, since I can't actually show you the West Bank? And that's sort of where the thing started from.
And I can see how Menachem's work in Poland on the ruins of and remnants would have resonated, that space would resonate. Hillel, I have a question for you. We're sort of shifting to the history, memory, and nostalgia theme. So there's a lot of references to history, sometimes selective references to history. I wonder whether you could tell us a little bit more. You try in the film to provide more context for Menachem and for us to understand, but the history of Arab-Jewish relations and then, of course, Israeli-Palestinian relations is quite complicated. And again, you try to do it in the film, but it's often cast in very simplified. Through very simplified lens, especially when it comes to activism, right? There is a certain story that wants to be told. So what do you think has been sort of left out of the film that's important for viewers to know, to contextualize that whole conversation, the relationship between Menachem and Lifta and that we may not hear in the film?
Well, I wouldn't say that necessarily something was left outside. I mean, there are very basic two narratives of the conflict. You have the Jewish narrative. It's about our biblical relations to the country, about our rights to the country, about the Shoah or the Holocaust as another justification for establishing a Jewish state in the land of Israel, on the one hand. And on the other hand, we have the Palestinian narrative, which is this is our homeland. We used to have a very good relation with Jews. We were fine with them until these Jews with Zionist crazy ideas came to Palestine in order to establish sovereignty or a Jewish state. So these two frameworks of thoughts, I think, were presented very well in the film. Now, of course, we can ask a lot of questions about or on each of them, but this is not important, I think, because I think people are driven by the narratives they know or what they are taught. and not by, facts or historical, accuracies. Yeah.
So, so narratives are more important than facts. So, and the history actually behind that, the complicated history is not something that drives people, but we still should pursue it, no, as historians and people, to understand that complexity.
This is a difference between historians and human beings, that historians are interested in facts and human beings interested in narratives.
And so this narrative and they clash, right? The narratives, the two narratives clash, the two meta histories and mega histories clash. Mehnaz, the film sort of brings together. You're a scholar. You've written about Holocaust and the Muslim memory and Muslim. It brings together a Holocaust survivors and a Palestinian from Lifta. How can your work on Holocaust from the Muslim perspective, from memory, can help us understand the dynamic that's happening between Dasha and Yaqub? Is there more to it than just the conflict between the Palestinian and then Israeli narratives and the land, or is there a larger story behind this? Can you help us process that encounter?
Sure. I'm not a historian, by the way. I'm in religion. So
that's okay.
I study religion, and I do Jewish-Muslim relations. And I teach Islam and the Holocaust at Manhattan University. We changed our name from college.
Okay, sorry.
So I want to say this is an amazing film. Thank you so much. It's just beautiful. It's a movie that encapsulates so much that I want to give to my students, give to the audiences. It asks very, very tough questions. It makes people uncomfortable, which is fantastic. I think it's really good. So thank you so much. I had to say that. So I think that the film brings up a lot of what I try to do in my own classes. I teach a class called Muslims and the Holocaust. And in that class, we look at the history of the Abrahamic faith. We look at Jewish life, Muslim life, and we look at the Ottomans and the relationship between Jews and Muslims. And then we move into the history and how the Holocaust started. So we kind of go back and forth historically. And at the end of class, we look at North Africa and the Holocaust, where we look at Jewish and Muslim Arab life. And then we spend about a week and a half on the current conflict in Israel and Gaza. That class has really transformed the ways that the students are thinking, because they're acknowledging the history more deeply. Yet they're also looking and acknowledging the suffering of victims of the Holocaust and victims of the Nakba, victims today in terms of October 7th, and the war in terms of the Palestinians' lives lost. And I think what's important is what your film says is that we have to recognize suffering. It's not a competition about who suffers more, but it's really about listening and acknowledging that suffering and knowing that that suffering is as important as yours and that your suffering is as important as theirs. It's not that it's more or less, but it's suffering. And I think that is the hardest thing for us to do in terms of this work. And I just want to say one more thing. There is a moment in the history, and I'm glad it talks about 1930s, that there is a parallel moment in the history of Palestinians in Palestine, and when there is a huge migration into Israel in the late 1930s and then the 40s, where I have my students think about what they are perceiving, like narratives. So when you look at writings from Palestinians or poetry on the ground, you see that they see the European colonial coming into Palestine, right? For Jews, it's escaping from another European colonial. And what we have to do is kind of understand that perspective, because for Muslims around the world, including where I was born, we were colonized for hundreds of years by the European colonial. So in the perspective of the Palestinian, they're seeing this as yet another colonization of what they've already gone through with the British. I mean, in North Africa, we talk about the French. You know, we can talk about India and Pakistan and the British. And we can keep going on with the Dutch. So there is this memory that's frozen. And that is a memory that needs to be acknowledged and discussed openly so we can have some kind of understanding.
Right, and memory leads to nostalgia, and the sort of nostalgia and what it does to political movements. And so, Aleksandra, you've recently written about an article which we'll share with you about militant memory. What role does nostalgia play in the development of militant memory? Maybe tell us a little bit more what you mean by that, and what role it can, and the role it plays in that development. So,
thank you. I will start by saying that also every law student should see this film. Because there are so many legal issues. Sorry for being so.
And we'll get to those. Yes.
Such a lawyer from the start on, but yes, I deal with my research, but also as a lawyer, I'm also practicing law. I represent clients, mostly in cases concerning anti-Semitism in Poland, but also historical memory. So I have been dealing with a lot of cases where Holocaust historians were put on trial and accused of the defamation of the good name of the nation and the state. So this is exactly where the nostalgia and emotions were translated first into binding laws and then into the cases in the courtroom. So it is all connected and very dangerous also, because when we talk about nostalgia, we are talking about emotions, about the feelings more on the individual or group level, but still I would say something soft enough to be discussed, perhaps sometimes in very difficult discussions and conversations, but still it doesn't go into the level where the law comes into question and can cause really serious consequences. So I deal with this next step when militant memory translates into law. And what I mean by militant memory, it's again best explained with the Polish example, where this victimhood or the competition of victimhood led in 2018 into the so-called Holocaust bill, where it was criminalized to claim any involvement or co-responsibility of Poles and Poland for the crimes committed by the Nazis during Second World War. Of course, the law didn't say crimes committed against the Jews, but everyone knew that this was the law directed against the historians and others involved in discovering the difficult truth about and discussing difficult truth about the Polish responsibility or involvement in crimes committed against the Jews during the war and after the war. So this militant memory feels in a way that it needs to be defended, and also by the means of criminal law or other laws. So this is the concept that I'm trying to develop to explain how the law can be used as a very dangerous tool within these discussions and narratives about the past. And this is also, of course, the case of what we have watched and seen and what we are observing, because Israel has introduced its own memory laws. Actually, all the countries and all the states, all the governments are very tempted to do so. So it's not that unusual, but the question about the consequences in this case is, I would say, particularly important.
Mm-hmm. You seem to want to say something, Aaron.
Sure. So bear with me. I haven't actually been speaking on these issues for many years, so I'm very rusty. I think for me, the extraordinary piece of this movie actually was maybe very different from everybody else's, partly because the subject matter was already really familiar. But when Hillel challenged Menachem and basically said, you're kind of a privileged narcissistic twit a little bit. And Menachem kept it in the film. Mm-hmm. That to me was actually the most interesting and memorable piece. In fact, when we were doing this, I haven't watched the film for 10 years, and that was the thing I remember from the film. And I looked again, I'm like, oh yeah, it was there. And I think that speaks to the issue about, to a lot of the rest of this actually, like the question of narrative versus truth. Because you can only resolve the dissonance between narratives by some willingness to inquire after truth. And also the idea here of, oh my God, I just lost the word. Romanticized, thank you. You know, Zionism itself was the ultimate nostalgic act, right? A country was recreated, a language was brought back, a set of folk art was created pretty much from nothing in an act of just extraordinary nostalgia. And I don't actually necessarily mean that in a critical way. But like so many things, right, it's always easier to see other people's nostalgia. Me too, right? Like, I'm sure I'm saying something stupid right now, right? But it's always easy to see other people's nostalgia, other people's violence, and whatever. And I think that one of the things that I came away from my work in the West Bank with was that it is important to recognize each other's pain, but it's actually more important to recognize each other's worth. Yeah, worth. Generally speaking, and there are exceptions, certainly, but I would say that generally speaking in Israeli society, the existence of Palestinians is not perceived as having intrinsic value. That doesn't mean that Palestinians themselves aren't seen as being human or having value or anything, but the presence, the cultural presence of Palestinians is tolerated, is essentially a necessary evil. And that is less true in my experience on the Palestinian side. The Palestinians who I've known, who are mostly activists and in no way happy about a whole range of things, actually do generally perceive value in the presence of Jews and the culture they brought with them. Like there's a lot of things about Israel, the political structure, freedoms, the economy, like there's a lot of stuff that people actually see as being valuable, no matter how they feel about how it came about or things like that. I think it's going to be very hard, or indeed impossible, to achieve a peace without there being a perception of actual value, of beauty and worth in the presence of non-Jews, of Palestinians, and the culture, the architecture, the music. And to me, that is why, that's the importance of Lifta, is actually not the politics or the suffering, it's the beauty. The beauty of the community, the beauty of even the ruins of the physical place. And that's the thing, that's why I wanted to show it to Menachem, and why I was so glad that he then did this amazing work that was way beyond anything I could ever contemplate.
Oh, I just want to say something in response there, and I, at the risk of going way off topic, but I would say, having been to Israel many times, that I think there's truth to what you're saying, but it's a political attempt to erase what is so, it comes down to my son telling me, no, it's not, what kind of salad is it? Israeli salad. It's that's not Israeli. It is clearly, it's like Donald Trump saying it's the Gulf of America. So I believe that even if the names have changed, that anybody, any Jew who has been to Israel and is feeling the depth of whatever that emotional experience, eating hummus in the marketplace in Jerusalem and walking down those ancient paved roads, is embracing, even if they don't want to. And when I first went to Israel in 1967, and the first thing we all bought was kafiyas, and my sisters bought the Arabic dresses, and it was an incredible embrace without naming it, and going to the Druze villages, and all that was an incredible embrace of Arab culture, and so I don't know where I'm going with this, but I just want to refute what you're saying on some level.
So actually, this is perhaps also playing into some of the theme of nostalgia and I want to. There's a lot. Nostalgia is given a lot of emotional play in the film. There's some kind of bonding between Yaqub's Lifta and Dasha's Benjin, her thinking about home. But there is also a lot of references to what we scholars called myths and counter-myths of Arab Jewish past. The sort of nostalgic, and it really reminded me of some of those responses that are given by elderly Poles about how it all was so lovely before the war, and they were all getting along and living next to one another, and we need to. So I wonder whether maybe Hillel, Mehnaz, and maybe Aleksandra, you could speak to that nostalgia feeding into these myths and counter-myths, especially in this case, Jewish-Arab myths and counter-myths and relations, but maybe.
Yes, I think that even nostalgia is politicized, in a sense. I mean, you cannot be nostalgic to past that you were not part of. So if you meet people today, none of them, if we speak about Jews, really lived under Islam. I mean, my father did, but he passed away. Yeah? He came from Afghanistan. But when you speak to the current generation, it's not part of their experience. So we are taught what someone wants to teach us, right? And we can see changes over the years. And the same is true for Palestinians and for Arabs and Muslims in general. So we can say that the Muslim historiography and Palestinian historiography and Arab, so they always speak about how good were lives of Jews under Islam. And of course it is partly true, because part of the time, for part of the Jews, it was good. And generally speaking, it was better than to live in Christian Europe. So there is a lot of truth in it. But the political usage of it is also very clear, because there is a lot of literature by Palestinians about pre-48 or pre-British Mandate Palestine, about Tiberias and Safad and Jerusalem, and how Jews and Arabs live together. And the point is, of course, that there was no equality, because the idea of equality is a very new one. I mean, at the later period, Ottoman period, there was inequality by law, but not in society, and so on and so forth. So it is clear that what Palestinians say when they said it was so good to live under Islam is that today it is very bad, and it is very bad because of Zionism. And generally speaking, it is true.
Right, and you mentioned that in the film you refer to order, this sort of social order that way. Yeah, Mehnaz, you seem to, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right now working on a book called The Wounded Muslim, Memory and Tragedy. And it's about nostalgia and about the Muslim world, but also about Muslim war and genocide, which I don't think Muslims have really addressed that much. But what I find that a lot of these nostalgic narratives, whether it's, this romanticism of the great old Islamic empire, or the beautiful days, or make America great again. I mean, these things are, sort of also trauma. They're kind of covering for the trauma, so there is somewhere to think about when you're in a situation where you're very desperate, right? So we create narratives psychologically. I mean, Freud would be the first one to say that, and other writers have written about memory and trauma. And so nostalgia helps us sometimes move forward, even if it's not true, if it's a mythology, right? Because life is really messy. It's not that some people were great at one time and some people were bad at one time. We're all bad and great at the same time, right? So that's another time frame thing. So I think nostalgia, especially, I would argue in Palestinian and Muslim contexts, is about seeing a way to survive out of, right? And to be able to remember something that was good. And that's something that people want to hold on to, especially in the Muslim world today. There's a lot going on in the Muslim world, as you know, so this is a big conversation in a lot of circles. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah.
There is an interesting point when you look at what Jews tell about their history, for example, in Baghdad or in other places, in Halab, that you can read people from the same neighborhood or even from the same family. The same is true for Morocco as well, that one of them tells about how great was the life with the Muslims, and his brother would say, no, it was terrible. Every time that we went to school, stones were thrown at us. And you ask yourself, how come that they tell such different stories? And then you look at, for example, Palestinians in Israel, citizens of Israel, and you can hear from the same family. The state of Israel is very generous to us. We have pensions when we are retired. And the others say, no, Israel is awful because they confiscate our land. So you can see that you can tell almost whatever you want according to either your memory or the things that you put more weight on it. So when we look at the past, people choose, and we can see in Israel now that the trend is to forget the bright side of living in Arab countries before 48 or before Zionism, and to focus on the bad side of it. Mm-hmm. So this is also interesting to follow the change in the way we tell this past.
And I think in the film, the nostalgia is supposed to be playing into the sort of effort to build empathy, but it ends up in that kind of distortion of the past and not saying certain things, and certain stories are told. So, for instance, I was thinking about, in the film, Yaqub Odeh is presented as an elderly man who grew up as a child in Lifta and longs for the return and is active in that. But he's not an ordinary Liftawi, right? He was part, and you mentioned that briefly in the film, he was part of the Palestinian military resistance. And I wonder, and I don't know whether any of you know, whether Menachem, when he spoke with him and when he arranged for Dasha to meet with him, whether he was aware about Yaqub Odeh's role in the Super Soul bombing in February 1969 and why he was imprisoned in this way. Did they ever discuss this issue of Yaqub's involvement, or did he later know? Did he ever learn?
I would say at the time of the film, I would feel really confident he didn't know, because I was a sounding board on weird, troubling stuff, and I would have a hard time believing that he had heard that and wouldn't have rung me up and been like, what the heck? So I don't know that for a fact, but I'm fairly confident.
Although Menachem looks for hidden sparks in everybody, so.
I would say that if I was there. I was there in that cafe when, and in other places with Yaqub and at his home. If we had known about that, I think actually, I don't think it would have turned Menachem off to using him. I think it would have been an incredible opportunity to dig deeper into, it would have been a difficult truth, but I'm sure would have been one we would have pursued rather than ignored or turned away from. That would not have been Menachem's way.
It certainly adds a certain additional layer to the film and to the way the story is told and narrated, even by Yakub itself, his silences and so on and so forth. So it would be, I think it adds some layer. So. Aleksandra, I want to go back to your point about law and the clashing, how we see these different historical truths clashing as narratives in the human experiences. So I wonder, you said that you wanted law students to watch it. Can you sort of talk a little bit about the legal framework that's behind, as people are telling their stories, there is all kinds of law framework behind it. So I wonder whether you could respond to the law in the film.
You just said different historical truths, right? So in law, there is an attempt to get into one historical truth and to establish it. If this is possible at all, I don't think so. And on many occasions, we, again, in Poland, but also elsewhere, we found out it's actually more damaging than helping anyone to really get into one historical truth. But actually, there is the whole movement, tendency in international law to establish the right to historical truth. We can talk about the right to historical truth in the context of another phenomenon called enforced disappearances. It started mostly in South America, when the fate of the people who disappeared were very often kidnapped by the government or the governmental forces. So their fate was unknown, and this is how this right to truth developed. So this is the right to truth, to know about the fate of your relatives, of your close ones. And then there has been the whole attempt to translate it and to broaden the scope of this notion of this right to establish historical truth for people who claim they want to have this right somehow confirmed also in the courtroom. And there are cases where, for example, Poles sue German newspapers, or also there were attempts to sue American media outlets for using this phrase, this notion, Polish concentration camps. So the claim is that this is against the historical truth, of course, but does it give a person the right to claim his or her own historical truth? So in the film, there is this part dealing with the court case, and I consider it to be a kind of an attempt to get this historical truth, to get this right, to have it confirmed for the Palestinians. So we can, discuss if this is useful, if this is meaningful, if this is important. I think it is, in the sense of legal consequences, if the law is, of course, respected, and that's the major condition for any legal action to be successful, in the sense of the fate and the rights and freedoms of the victims of violations. But this right to historical truth is something interesting, I think, also in the context of the film.
And there seems to be another legal issue about land rights and property rights. And there is the difference between what's going on in Poland and the reclaiming of properties. There is the context of reclaiming Lifta. And then there is, of course, just recently, there are some efforts in Syria and Jewish property, and in Syria with the change of the of the government. I think we're still years or decades before there are any kind of rights of Jews who were expelled from various countries in the Muslim world to get to that. But I wonder whether we could sort of talk about that legal context, which is clearly playing itself, and we'll talk about next time when we talk about the restoration of Jewish sites in Poland a little bit more. So I don't know who wants to take
I would just address Poland as a Pole, all right? A Polish lawyer. I mean, Poland remains the only country in European Union and more broadly in the Council of Europe that has no, until today, no comprehensive legal regulation concerning restitution. Other countries and the countries where there was a lot of Jewish property before the war and huge Jewish communities, they have all implemented laws that deal with the problem, with the matter in all possible aspects. So they like settled the things. Poland has never done this for many reasons, most of which were not economical at all. They were more nostalgic, right, and memory-based or memory-related. So as it is now, there is still this path of going to court with individual cases and claiming your rights. But of course, it takes years. It takes financial resources, and the chance of success is very low. 3 years ago, there was an amendment introduced into the Polish Administrative Code, and actually it stopped almost all possibilities of claiming any compensation for the properties lost, because it limited the time when you could appeal. And of course, after the war, there was Stalinism, communism. There were no legal ways of obtaining and confirming your rights to property. So the time limit was set to 30 years since the administrative decision was taken. So it was back many years ago. So actually now all these possibilities are closed but not only for Jews. It's like it's discriminatory towards everyone. So that's the only good thing about this law.
Yeah, it's just, it's really nice to be on this panel. I feel very honored to be on this panel. It's pretty cool. I just wanted to tell a story kind of related to something Hillel said, I think. It may be known to everybody. So in 1929, in Hebron, there was a massacre of Jews by partly Palestinian Muslims living in Hebron, also who came from the surrounding area.
And Hillel has a book on that.
Oh, okay. See, I said probably people though, right? Okay, well then he's gonna know this, but I'm guessing the next part is not as well known. So there's an account of the entire thing from an investigation that was done by the Zionist, whoever the Zionists were at that time, in the Central Zionist Archives in Israel. And it's hundreds and hundreds of pages of documentation on exactly what went down and who did what to whom and all that kind of stuff. So there were two Palestinians who saved the lives of some, I'm going to be off on the numbers, it's been a long time, like I'm going to say 30 Jews who they hid, and one of whom sat on his horse with his sword out and scared off the attacking other Palestinians. And the other was his, I forget if it's his son or not, anyway, a 14-year-old kid who ran to the British stockade or whatever to get help. And that boy I interviewed a few years ago, and he was 96 years old at the time, I think. His son is like the leading was at that time, again, 10 years ago, like the leading Palestinian figure in Hebron. And I sat down with him, and it was extraordinary. He tells this amazing story, not in any way bragging at all, just kind of describing it. At one point, I got nostalgic, actually, and he cut me down. I was like, so it sounds like mostly the Palestinians were trying to protect Jews. And he was like, no, like some killed, some saved. I was like, okay, it's a good lesson. But the interesting thing is that that this guy who would qualify as a righteous Gentile by any possible definition you want to use was at that time like literally daily harassed by Israeli troops in Hebron. Not even settlers, Israeli troops, and settlers, I shouldn't say. And I think the thing here is that it's not, kind of like what Hillel is saying, it's not only the weren't we good parts that are political, it's the weren't they bad parts. And largely, even when they're true, they're inauthentic, because the Palestinians primarily are inconvenient. And they're not inconvenient because they're bad, to whatever extent they are or not bad. They're inconvenient because they're Palestinians and they're there. And the fact that, and that's one of the reasons why this guy and some other people like him are treated no differently. Because the fact that they're individually different as people doesn't make them any less inconvenient as Palestinians.
Well, I think the issue is that neither side is comfortable with acknowledging power. But Hillel, I want to go back to that question on the law and property. That is.
Yes, I think this is a very basic issue when we deal with the question of Lifta, because the Israeli law from 49, actually from 1950, the law of absentee property, the idea of this law was to transfer all the land or the property of Palestinians who left Palestine during the war into the hand of the state, of the guardian of absentee property, and then to the Israeli land authority. And the plans that we can see in Lifta, but also all over Israel, because I don't know if it's 40 or 60% of Israeli land is absentee property, is a land that was direct or indirect possession of Palestinian refugees. So in this sense, I mean, when the Knesset decided about this law, the Prime Minister said, you know that what we are doing with this land, all the new immigrants who come to Israel, all the new moshavim, all the new kibbutzim are being built on this land. We need this land in order to allow Jews to immigrate to the state of Israel. So this law is very basic law in the land tenure in the state of Israel. So what we have now is, for example, in Jerusalem, you have a Jewish neighborhood who were abandoned in 48, I mean the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. After 67, the Jews had the right, the owners had the right to go back to there and to reestablish the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. But Palestinians from the Arab neighborhoods are not able to do the same because it is under two different laws. The Jewish property in East Jerusalem was also under the absentee or the enemy guardian of the Jordanians, but after 67, it also returned to the state of Israel. So we can see also in Sheikh Jarrah, in other places, that Jews can go back to their houses of pre-1948, but Palestinians cannot. But it has nothing to do formally with Jews and Arabs, by the way.
It's the legal.
It is the laws do not mention Jews and Arabs. It's about the property and its location.
Yeah, so law is different. So we have a couple of questions, and one is why should everyone outside of Israelis, Palestinians, Jews, and Arabs be educated in the history of the region, and what is the right thing to do when it comes to teaching Jews about Lifta, show tourists, as shown in the film, or let Palestinians show their way? And I think this is also in a very interesting parallel with Poland, and the kind of dynamic who is showing, who is restoring, who is making these emotional guidance and claims. So I wonder if anybody wants to take on that question.
There's two questions.
Yeah, there is one, why should everybody learn about this? And then what's the right thing to do?
Well, I mean, I've been doing Jewish-Muslim relations for a long time. But I think that you have the evidence. It's a global issue. So I think it brings in issues of land, identity, religion, colonialism, and it looks at, it's not just about Palestinians or Israelis. It's gone beyond that. And I think it's important for us to teach or have our students think about these questions in every context, right? Including the context of Israelis and Palestinians. So, I mean, I don't know about all of you, but I've never witnessed so many demonstrations globally in my life, or even looking at history, right? So there is something that's really important about the issue of Israelis and Palestinians. I remember 20 years ago when I got into this is the 21st century problem, because everything comes in there. And I don't mean, again, Jews and Muslims or Arabs and Israelis, but these questions of identity, migration, settlement, land, and religious identity is a big one too right now. So these are all the issues we're dealing with, not just in this country, but everywhere in the world. We are going through one of the biggest displacements of people in the world today. We keep missing it. We keep missing Somalia, and we keep missing Sudan, and we keep missing these huge resettlements and huge migrations all over. So I think that's why it's important to teach it, whatever way you want to teach it. I take a different approach as a Muslim woman. I teach things that are very challenging for me in the classroom, but my hope is to create some understanding. I can't just create peace, but I can create some understanding and challenging questions for students and audiences. And that's what I hope to do. Second question.
Yeah, what is the right thing to do in terms of, with Lifta tourism or not, and the connections? I don't know what anybody wants to say. If not, did the film experience leave the team behind this film more optimistic or pessimistic about Israeli-Palestinian relations by the completion of the film? I think if you guys could go back 10 years and not think where we are now, which I think we're in a very pessimistic moment. But what did you think? It doesn't, end in a note like the hiding and seeking ends. But how did the team? How did you? All those involved.
I just want to say that Menachem was a rare individual. That if all Jews and all Palestinians were like Yaqub, the Yaqub we meet in this film, and the Menachem that I know, I think there'd be some hope in the world, and because Menachem is essentially non-ideological believer that human beings can change their perspectives and can be open to other people's opinions. We live in a world where people do not care about the truth or about anything other than their own political agendas, and will speak, obviously, as we know, lies to affirm their own beliefs, and will kill people who are speaking that truth. So that's my opinion.
Maybe that's the legacy that he is leaving us, that we should listen and be open to change and to all humans.
And I would say Aaron's point about the fact that Hillel. First of all, I just really have to. We did not have a film before that we could really put together before we interviewed Hillel. I mean, so I really commend you for putting so many pieces together that we could not figure out. But I also want to commend the dialogue that you had, where both of you were interested in, first of all, enjoying each other's company, which is really important, but also in listening to each other, and your way of humoring Menachem in the way that, you know, one needs to do when one goes to a Passover Seder or whatever, or some other event where you can barely speak sometimes to your relatives. So that I really appreciate that spirit of that nuance that you really brought to the film. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. And I want to invite you to next week, the Memory Keepers, which will try to figure out what it's about and how to think about memory in Poland and restoration of the. So thank you so much for coming, for staying with us, and we'll see you tomorrow and on Tuesday next week. Thank you.